Nick, how are you doing? It's what, like midday for you? It's really late for me today.
It's evening, 6
Oh, it's
o'clock at
evening.
night.
Yeah, there you go. That's why you're in such a good mood. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, you know what I've been up to? It was actually quite funny. You know that most of our listeners are sort of junior folks, PhD, postdocs, assistant profs, that sort of lot. What you may not know is that here in Germany, they actually organize themselves. There is an early career researcher forum, I guess you might call it, of all the
Hmm.
IS junior researchers, assistant profs, postdoc. They'll come together once a year, and they have this community event. They meet, they mingle, they get someone in to talk about, the 10 best things to do for your career and stuff like this. They have a panel on how to become a professor and how to publish and all these sorts of things. It's really
Oh,
cool.
that's pretty cool. Do they do it in English or German?
It's technically speaking, it's international because every now and then they got an international speaker. Like they had Marie Clara Stein from Copenhagen there, and Michael Roseman from Australia. But these folks speak German, so it's a pretty German event. But I think it's awesome because I don't know whether any other country, any other community has that. It's wonderful. So I'm a big fan. But here's the funny story. So they actually asked me this time, because it's in my hometown here in Münster, they asked me to come and speak and give a talk. And I said, sure. What do you want me to talk about? And they said, can you give a talk on how to publish design science in A-star journals?
Have you ever done that?
And I was like, what? Like, I've never done that. I have no idea why you're asking me this question. Go and figure out someone who has done that, So that was my initial reaction. And then, actually, I asked some people, and one of them is actually here. So I asked a bunch of people who actually did publish design science in a sub journal, and one of them is on a podcast today, namely Shirley Gregor. Hey, Shirley, how are you?
Hello to both of you.
So for you, it's early morning, isn't it? Right? It's 8 a.m.
It's lovely. Yes, it's very good.
So because Shirley is so famous, she makes me stay up late and make Nick work late. And all we had to do was like, sure, Shirley, we can do that. We can.
Whatever. Name the time.
It wasn't that. It's just that me being perhaps a more mature person, the chances of me being awake after 10 o'clock at night are quite slim.
See that, Recker? She's already calling you immature. And we just started the podcast.
It's a feasibility thing.
Yeah, so I did prepare a little bit, and I talked a little bit about designs. But to be honest, the core message that I wanted to say: look, publishing design science research in an A-star journal is just like publishing anything else in an A-star journal. Why would it be any different? That's sort of like the basic message that I wanted to have, and the reason for why I said that was, well, because why would it be any different? It's a legitimate way of doing research by now. And so the same standards apply. Theoretical contribution, good framing, good problematization, blah, 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 blah. And that's sort of how I initially felt about the topic.
So Shirley, what do you think? Because what you say might be true, but we don't see a whole lot of top tier design science publications, do we? Why is that?
You do. It depends a bit on what journal you look in. And what region of the world you live in, I think, as to how you look. But I mean, there's been a couple in the course of this conversation that Jan had with myself and others. We did look at a few studies where they've actually studied, done proper literature reviews and studied the number of publications in each thing. And there are a couple of journals that probably publish, several studies have shown publish more, and that's JAIS and DSS.
Mm-hmm.
And the others, the numbers they're not that high, to tell you the truth. This is a casual thing, so I'm not going to look up the numbers now.
So if I'm going to do a design science study, I should publish it in JAIS or DSS. It seems like I'll have the highest likelihood.
No, the other ones do publish things, but it's just that their proportion's a little bit higher.
So I always thought this is the reason it was always hard to publish design science research. So tell me what you think of my folk theory here that I'm just making up with no evidence. I think that people who want to do design research are essentially technical people, and they want to build an artifact. They want to write a program. They want to do something. They want to solve a problem and then publish it. And they don't want to read what other people did. They're essentially engineers and they want to publish their engineering. So these
What
technical
a terrible
folks,
theory.
is that a bad theory? Oh,
To be honest, I completely agree with Nick. And I think I even may have said that in my talk in that workshop. I said, like, look, I think one of the reasons is that the engineering people, they want to, the people that want to build stuff, they really focus on building stuff, and they don't focus on the writing part. And so mind you, they're horrible writers. That's something
well,
that
they can be, or they don't want to be. Yeah.
This is a very narrow view of design science research too. What about people who talk about where they're not looking strictly at an artifact, but they're looking at, say, the way decision support systems are implemented into an organisation? So there was a lovely article in MISQE not too long ago. I think Oliver Mueller was one of the authors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Ollie, sure.
It got best paper of the year, and it didn't say it was design science research, but they went and they examined case studies, and they called it lessons learned.
Mm-hmm.
But in my view, design science research is work that tells you how to do something, or assists you in knowing how to do something. And as far as I'm concerned, if our research doesn't do that, then I'm not too fussed about it at all.
Well, that's a strong position. Okay.
Yeah. So purely descriptive research, you don't think is
No, but
unless it's somehow normative.
If it's closely linked to the artifact, if it's closely linked to, so you could do descriptive research and say, I looked, engineer X built this artifact, which he claims wonderful, and then I went and studied how it was used in an organisation, and I found that the people didn't like it at all.
Right. And
I could say why. So I've linked the knowledge very closely to the artifact.
But I guess I don't think of that as design science. That's just plain old research, right? That's it. No,
but there's others. I don't know if on these things we're supposed to puff up our own papers, but
no, please do. I know that's why we asked you on, because you've written about the, anatomy of a design theory, anatomy of a design principle, right?
I suppose even before puffing up with the paper, I'll just go back to why I wrote that theory paper in the first place. Was I had come to academia from industry.
Yeah.
And I did build things and make things, but I'm not an engineering nerd or geek, am I? No.
Well, so I did. I came from industry and I built things, and I don't want to build things anymore. I'm playing, right? In academia, I'm doing research.
I want to help other people build things. So I want to have knowledge that goes in textbooks that will go out to students and help them build things.
Right.
So that when they go out and they're building things in industry, they don't keep making horrible disasters.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that interesting. I have two views on this. I think the one, I always thought that IS papers of any genre, I don't know whether I would classify all of them as design science papers, but I always thought, like, look, these papers should always tell us something about the artifact.
Yeah, they should, but a lot.
Yeah, but a lot of them don't.
Very, very slight. It's very slight. So it's more about the behavior of the people.
Exactly.
Why
so I always
have beliefs? No, they're psychological papers.
So here's the question then. So I always thought, like, can I extract something from my papers that goes back and informs systems design at the very end? So this could be like a half a page on page 40 in the implication section, but I always think, like, look, is there something here that tells me something about how I can make the artifact better? No, what I hear you saying is that automatically makes my work design science in a way.
No, I'm afraid it doesn't, because it would be very helpful, but sometimes people just do this because they've been told to do it and they just tack it on the end.
Right. Like me, I'm always forced to put on these implications for practice on my papers.
Yeah. But again, if you look in our textbooks and you see case studies that have been quoted, quite often they are done by academics or some forms of artifacts that are useful. And then a lot of work, like I'm sort of worked a lot in the HCI area. So Ben Snyderman is doing these rather good blogs at the moment.
Yeah.
So he's looking very much at ethics and AI, which is a tremendously useful thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So there again, that's implications for design. If you design something and it's acting in an unethical,
in a bad way.
It's not good from an ethical point of view. Yeah.
So Shirley, here talking to you, I'm getting this sense that I came into the conversation thinking of something called design science research, which in my brain means building an artifact, and especially in conferences, right? So when people build artifacts, they want to publish the artifact and call it design science, right?
Yes.
And sometimes they'll even do a test and compare it to another artifact and say mine's better, right? So that's kind of the one stereotypical design science when I think design science. The other one, and I see this a lot lately, last few years, is they build an artifact, review a little bit of research, and then elicit 4 to 6 principles. And these 4 to 6 principles have nothing to do with any principles that have ever come before. They're just like throwing them out there. It's kind of like affordances nowadays in qualitative work. The whole thing is to come up with 3 new affordances, 6 new affordances. In design research, it's I'm coming up with 3 more, 6 more principles, right? And it seems that those are the two. So when I think design science, those are the two things that I think. But hearing you, first of all, you did a little sleight of hand. You changed it from design science. You called it design research. And then it seems like your view is much broader than mine. Mine was like narrow.
Yeah, well, again, no, that's right. And that's partly why the paper I was going to puff is by Alexander Matcher, Shirley Gregor, and Jeff Parsons. And we wrote that because we've had these problems come up ourselves with our students and other faculties. And so we'd heard Izak Benbasat say at a conference, the work I do, I'd love to be called a design science researcher, but I don't think they'd welcome me.
This is funny because when I think about who's the biggest design scientist in our field, I would always pick Izak right there. Because if you think of what he's been doing, absolutely, he's been doing experiments in e-commerce for 40 years. But to do this, he built all these different recommendation agents of different sorts. One of them was a chatbot, the other one was with colors, the other one was animated, etc. And then he very rigorously tested all of them. Exactly. But in a way, he was always building systems. And I remember when I was at Vancouver for a while, over 10 years ago, he literally in his team, he had a systems developer, like he literally had a guy to help him build things. So, people always think of it as a great experiment or the e-commerce guy, but in a way, I think this is the most published design scientist of them all, isn't he?
And that's why I think he is so published and so admired, because he does very sound behavioural research, but it is so focused on the artifact, often, as you said, because they've built them as but what we've referred to that as in that paper with Alexander is design-oriented behavioural research. And I will just tell, I've been to Vancouver as well. I stayed there just after I'd finished my PhD. And I know some of his ex-students, and some of them would have, in the course of their thesis, one of the chapters would have been at the beginning about building the artifact. But often when I look in their careers later, what they've published is the tests.
Yeah.
Experiments. But see, that was quite a long time ago. But see, I suffered from this as well because I had a master's degree in computer science before I did my PhD. Yeah. And I went to Ron Webber, who I wanted to have as my advisor. And that's a little lesson to students, I think. I looked around at all the thesis people had written, and I thought, who was their supervisor, the good ones? And it was Ron. So I thought, I'll have Ron if he'll have me. And I said to him, Ron, so this was over 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And I said, Ron, what would you say if someone came to you and said they wanted to build an artifact? And he said, I'd tell them to go away to computer science. Yeah. But I wanted Ron, and I stayed with Ron. Yeah. And I did build an artifact, which I think was quite a good artifact. I couldn't publish it in computer science because it wasn't clever enough. That's the problem with design science. It is risky from that extent because you don't know at the start whether it's going to be novel enough. Yeah. But so then I just did rigorous experiments on it, behavioural research. Use the artifact in experiments on explanations, on people's reactions to explanations, and I got them published. Yeah, that was again. So, and since then, it's irritated me that more couldn't be done to have design science work that are accepted.
But it seems to me that, all right, so what I'm hearing are two different things from you. On the one hand, you wish you could have published the artifact. Are you saying that you wish people could just publish artifacts? I mean, isn't that just design? That's not research. That's just coding.
If looking back, if I'd known then what I know now, so the artifact I built didn't seem particularly clever, but if I had been able to, what you said, I think this getting the reflections out at the end, you got to put thought into that. So I could have extracted principles about building that particular type of system, which I could have taught to other theory. Yes, you could have, and I think it would have been publishable, because there were things I did as a designer that I probably did because I was a designer and an educator, that I just did it. But then now when I think back, when I started, the people I went to, the financial planning people, said, oh, you can't do that. You can't build a system for superannuation that ordinary people can use. So the moment someone says you can't do that, that means no one knows how to do it at the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but this point, I want to go back to this thing that I said earlier, where I basically said that design scientists don't know how to write. But in a way, this is exactly what you just said, is exactly what I mean, is they're interested in building the artifact and this extracting this knowledge on how to do things and expressing that and sort of making that argument in a paper in a way that it convinces people. I do think that's really where they're struggling. I haven't done a lot of these myself, but I've edited quite a few of them. And I basically never found a flaw with the artifact or the design of the artifact. It's always well built. It's usually it's quite interesting, to be honest. Sometimes it's novel and whatnot. So that's usually not where the problem is. They're building these things well, but then the rest falls apart. So some of the conceptual stuff, the theoretical, maybe the implications, maybe this extraction of the knowledge. And Maung Sain, who's another person that I've talked to about this, he always put this in this wonderful phrase when he says that the quality of the design principles, Nick, you mentioned these, is sort of how I extract the knowledge from them. And he says they're lacking. He always says, like, the design principle one is the user interface must be user friendly. Oh, really? I think he's got a point. A lot of these design principles, some of that knowledge extraction stuff, it's just
Recker, this is my problem with principles in general. And right, Shirley, you brought up ethics and AI ethics, right? So I'm starting to do a little work there, and everybody agrees. Like if I say we want fairness for our algorithm, don't we all agree, right? And we want to make sure that it's fair, say with respect to gender or race. We all agree, don't we? Right. And I have a feeling if you ask anybody, they'll all agree to that principle. And then the question is, now, how do you operationalize it? Well, of course, there are 14 different operationalizations of fairness last time I checked, right? And then you think, okay, which one's appropriate at which point in time? Well, it's not that easy now, is it? Because a certain thing that we agree to today, say with gender, that we're going to use this particular standard for gender fairness, right? In a few years, if we start getting, say, equity of outcomes, we might not want equity of, one of the other definitions, right? So this idea of having some sort of the principle we all agree to, and it's great for organizing us and saying, yeah, we all want, say, gender fairness, right? But when the rubber meets the road and it's now implementing the principle, that's where everything is, right? Isn't it? Isn't that? And that's so contextual. That's so. Yeah.
No, but there are levels at which it can. Again, there's some areas where it would be harder, but human-computer interaction is a good case of where the principles are helpful. So Snyderman's got what he calls the 10 golden rules of interface design. And if you're an interface designer, you just use them. You use them all the time. So they're in textbooks. People in industry use them to check over their artifacts. And they're quite high level. Like one of them's, give immediate feedback. And it's actually got numbers, like how quick the feedback has to be. But see, those principles too, underneath them have got a lot of, in the textbook, they have a lot of contextualization. So they'll give examples. So again, one journal paper isn't enough to be developing good design principles, really. Yeah. You can have, really, I'm very much in favour of review articles or people that go and do multiple case studies and try and pull things together. And
So if I wanted to do a paper on, and I wanted to say anything about interface design, I would maybe start with Schneiderman's work. I would look at his principles, and then I would think, okay, what can I say to extend this? Can I come up with a new principle? Can I argue with a principle? Can I elaborate on one of his ideas, right? It would always be in relation to him in the cumulative tradition, wouldn't it?
Well, that's exactly right. Yes, you should. Yes. Yeah. And again, there's other areas that are building up like that too. So one of the people that worked with Alex, Stefan Marana, he was, and I know Alex's group keeps doing it, is chatbots. And they're building up a whole body of work about chatbots. Yeah. And I think it's still, and so Stefan had a nice review article on that. So there is knowledge building up there. But look, I will tell you that getting the work with principles published is very hard.
Yeah, I could imagine.
So, and then Mung, again, has got his own ideas. But we had a paper published in Aegis, which is action design research, and we elicited design principles. That took 5 rounds of review. And the work itself took about 3 years. It was in Bangladesh. We were trying to get the government to implement something.
Oh,
so
wow.
Enormous project, you get one A star.
One Aegis. All right. This is really interesting because that you bring up action research too, because I make the same accusation to action researchers. I think that they did a project during their PhD. Let's say I work for SAP and I'm getting my PhD with Recker, which a lot of Germans do. And we get a lot of Scandinavians and a lot of people who are working during their PhD. And I'm working at SAP. And then I'm like, I was on this project delivering it to one of our customers, whatever, this bank. Yeah. And I'm just going to write that up and call it action research, right? It's similar to building an artifact and trying to publish it. It's like, I did something in the world and I want to call it action research, right?
And I want to get a certificate for that.
Yeah.
See, that's why I was saying, in a way, it is more risky. Yeah. Because again, if you're building something, you might come up against something in that project that is particularly tricky and you're clever enough to solve it. And then it would be a contribution, but you can't guarantee that would happen.
Yeah.
But if you use the Izak Benbasat model and have your experimental vehicle, and do your tests,
that's a different approach. And there again, you're just doing behavioral research, but you're doing behavioral research around a particular class of artifact, right? So
well, I've done some of that. I mean, we've been doing some behavioral experimental research where we're trying to build green information system, make people do the greener thing, the better thing, lower
your sense making paper.
Well, but it's basically based on the sense making paper, but that's and now it's
an empirical study.
How do you operationalize this? Like, what exactly how can I build a system do this? It's very difficult to get that published. And we've never even tried to frame it as a design science, even though we build 2 systems. Yeah, because I can't do the experiment without them. I can't study how an information system nudges people or in some other way provides an affordance for you to do something a little bit different, a little bit greener without building these things. Otherwise, I can't run my experiments, right? I got to have my treatment groups. So it's funny in the sense, what we realized there is these systems that we're building, they're very simple. Yeah, one of them is an email reporting system. Yes. Yeah, so like a monthly email that comes around. The other one's sort of like a forum. And then we do have reviewer comments like, well, can't you build a dashboard or can't you build this really complex artifact? Where we are trying to look, we need a system that does these 3 things. Well, actually, that email does that. It's probably also the most used information systems on the planet. Yeah. So go home. Yeah, not everything has to be complex.
So did I ever tell you a story about Nikhil Srinivasan and at a conference? So Nikhil Srinivasan and I, with Kali Luttanen and Youngjin and Dick Bolin, were on this paper. And Nikhil was first author. He was presenting it at ISIS. And I think we were in Europe and there were a bunch of German kind of design scientists. We went in like the design science track. And what we did was we studied a large infrastructural project. And we looked at existing work on infrastructural design, and we tried to extend and do some things. And it was a theory work, right? And it was looking at something, and we claimed it was design. It was about the design of infrastructure, right? But it was very much qualitative, empirical, case-based investigation. And I think he was German, stands up and goes, "How can you call this design research? You didn't build an artifact. You can't say anything. about the design of the artifact. You're just going and looking at things. And poor Nikhil, he was just a PhD student at the time. He's looking out at the group and he's going, and I'm sure he was answering it fine, but Kale got up and he's like, well, of course, this is design research. We're looking at some large corporate investments in this, and and he made this argument. He said, if all we can do for design research is study the artifacts we can make, all we'll be doing is looking at little Mickey Mouse artifacts. So he basically told this senior guy that all he's doing is Mickey Mouse artifacts, right? He's doing little things that, so he kind of smacked him down. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so that was why Alex and Jeff and I wrote that paper that's come out in CAIS, because we saw this sort of thing and we wanted to. And Alex and I again have been working away on a paper for, I think, probably 5 years now on communicating from artificial intelligence systems, which was the area I've always been in. And we've eventually given up on that paper because we were doing an enormous review and trying to extract design principles from across all these different artifacts and all these different types of explanations. And it was probably too complex.
There's too much, and you can't salvage anything from that? That sounds like an impressive body of work.
I think the fact that I retired, we had COVID and I retired is sort of... Yeah, it does turn over in my mind occasionally. It's still up. I haven't thrown it out. It's in a box just up behind me. So.
The paper in the box. I like that. Can I piggyback on that story that Nick said? Because that's something that I wanted to bring up. Now, during the pandemic, I was actually getting interested in some of the information systems that we used. Very, very concretely, the dashboards. The Johns Hopkins University built this giant dashboard, and then all the countries had their own dashboards, and there was a global dashboard, and there was a German dashboard, and a US dashboard, and we all followed the numbers, especially in the first year or so. We checked these numbers; these dashboards got checked every day, and I thought they were interesting. Representationally, they were interesting, I thought. Anyway, so I decided I'm going to go and study this artifact. So I went in Germany, there's one national dashboard that a company built that are specializing in geospatial information system, and they work together with the Maine Health Institute. Anyway, so I went to these guys and asked them, etc. And I talked to the designers and I talked to the people that brought the data in, etc. and so forth. And I actually did publish a paper on that. And as I was doing this, it occurred to me, wow, I don't think I've ever seen a paper like this before where someone has just analyzed an artifact. We don't do that, do we? Yeah. So I did call it even design science. So in a way, this is a design science, a journal paper in a way. But of course, I don't build anything. I'm not even pretending to build anything, but I really carefully go through how that particular artifact was designed and how it could have, would have, should have been designed in a better way.
No, that's. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's excellent. That's what we should do. That's what we found actually when we did this paper. We ended up with these different styles of work, like actual construction work, or what we'd call the Izak Benbasat model, the manipulation type, or reviews, or looking at systems that were deployed, and the systems being deployed had the least amount of attention.
Yeah. Deployment, construction, elucidation, manipulation. That's pretty cool. I got to read this.
Yeah, because I mean, if we're sending systems out into the people are saying, okay, I've built this, my artifact's better than your artifact, and they go out in the world and then somehow or other it's discovered that it's doing something awful to the people using it. We need to be studying that as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like this. I just pulled up your paper here. I'm looking at that 2x2. It is cool. And you really are taking a broader view of design research. Now, tell me, all right, we come up with rules every once in a while. I'm going to call this
Shirley's rule.
These are Shirley's. All right, we'll make them Shirley's rule, but she has to agree to them. And I'm going to lump design science and action research in the same bucket because I think that there's a dysfunctional kind of approach to it, and then people have a tough time with that. But if they do it like scholars and like researchers, where they do it the way they're supposed to, meaning there's a research problem, there's a cumulative tradition, I design an artifact, I learn to extend the cumulative tradition, like I want to do an interface, I read Ben Schneiderman's rules, I extend the work by knowing. That's a scholar, right? Similarly with action research. I understand how, whatever, to change a system in Bangladesh. I try and get it changed in Bangladesh. I look at the results in Bangladesh, and I'm actually involved in making the change in the world, right? So that would be action research. And I think the dysfunctions are when people don't do all that and they just want to build an artifact, and now I want to publish something about my artifact. Or I did a project for industry, now I want to publish my project for industry. And then they're having trouble publishing. I mean, it's hard to publish any kind of research, but I think that if you're doing that, so how would we frame Shirley's rule?
No, I think we want to call it our group rule, not Shirley's
the group,
rule.
the three of us?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a sense, without thinking about it too much, it means you have to be, it's doing research as opposed to you do research, you're not doing professional work.
Yeah, you're not doing a project, you're not doing an artifact, you're actually doing research into artifacts, research into the project, then that's when it becomes.
In fact, and there's another interesting point about this. Just about a year or so ago, I was asked to be involved, to be an expert witness in a court case.
Mm-hmm.
And in Australia, companies can claim tax breaks if they're doing research.
Ooh.
Yeah,
and
true.
so we had a software company that claimed it was doing research, and the tax department had to determine whether it was research or whether it was just professional development work.
And what did you say?
Well, I said it at great length, and I was paid very well. It beats working as an academic.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid I went back because the tax department's got its own definition, which is basically the scientific method.
Yeah.
And that it was the things we were saying. You really had to do hypothesis testing, though, but you had to show that there was a body of knowledge, to show that you were adding to a cumulative body of knowledge, and you had to show that you'd done some testing of what you'd done in some way. And
I think that's it, that you can't ignore the body of knowledge, and it should be somewhere near the start of your project. All right. So I have one other critique I've heard, and I know you've written a lot of this work, and I know you've written some of the most cited and the most popular and the most, but I've heard people say people don't do design science research or action science or action research. They just write about it. And that they say that everybody's talking, everybody's writing about doing design science research instead of actually doing design science research, right? Have you heard this criticism?
I heard it.
That's a fair comment. But if you go back 20 years ago, it didn't have any credibility at all, or it just went under the radar. We were actually publishing what we called engineering research 20, 30 years ago. People were, without recognizing it. But if people hadn't written those articles, we wouldn't be having these conversations. And I think it has got to a more mature state. But there does come a time when you've got enough of these articles too. So that's a fair comment. So
Shirley, you've also been an editor for these types of papers for God knows how long, and for many different journals and so forth. So I'm guessing you would have seen a lot of the good and the bad and the ugly of these types of papers. Now, my very limited experiences, what I've experienced is the design science community. If I compare that to other communities, think of it as a special interest group, like the special interest group that is the designs community. If I compare that to some of the other special interest groups, I think they're being particularly harsh on each other. It's goddamn difficult to get a conference paper in the design science track. The artifact is never good enough. Whatever evaluation I give them is never good enough either. The design principles are either too abstract or not abstract enough. I do think this is an impression. I don't have any evidence for this, but I think they're being bloody hard on each other. Would you agree with this?
You might be right. I mean, we taking five cycles to get that that ADR. And look, one of the things, because I suffer too, and one of the things I see is that some people, I hope it's not me, but some people who have written on ADR or DSR, they've got very fixed ideas in their head about how it should be done.
Yeah.
So because they've come up and they've had to struggle and be, badly treated. And then they've got this very fixed idea in their own head. So it could be even a matter of, and if anyone's listening, they might know who they are. They will insist on the word design research instead of design science research.
Yeah.
Or they'll insist on an excellent paper about how design principles should be acceptable to the user community. So we know who these people are.
Well,
I know.
Well, I don't know that one. I just know the one that you did with Leona and Stefan on the anatomy of a design principle, right? So was that in response?
We don't see these as absolute, must-dos. They're guidance. But I mean, the fact that, so some other, like the ADR paper we had, one of the reviewers insisted we use the word ensemble for our artifact. And that was because of their own view.
It was Johnny Holmstrom, wasn't it? I think it was Johnny. He gets this.
No, I don't think it was. No.
Okay.
But anyway, so you get these very quite, I think it's because it's still probably a bit of lack of maturity, but a lack of acceptability. So you get quite strong views on doing it a way. So I don't think we should have that. And the other thing is too, like if I look back, my views have matured too. So people sometimes will come and accuse me of having said something in a paper I wrote 16 years ago. And I think, well,
first of all, I don't remember it. Secondly, changed my mind.
Yeah, I'm different. The world's changed. Yeah. And the one thing I would like to correct these misconceptions is people keep saying, you're the theory person. You must have theory. But if they look carefully in my papers, I always say, by theory, I mean a body of knowledge. So my papers have always been about having sort of quite an expansive view of theory.
I love that, actually. There's a cumulative tradition, right? And we could call Ben Schneiderman's interface principles, that you can call it a theory, maybe it's not, whatever. That's the knowledge we have. Let's extend that.
That's right? Exactly right. Yeah, I wouldn't care if you called it a knowledge, principles, whatever. He calls them rules.
I like that. I like that a lot, because oftentimes people are too, they're obsessive. There's this view of theory, and they have different views of theory. But if we just say, look, it's how are you, and one way of thinking is the conversation, right? How are you extending an existing conversation? How are you extending an existing body of knowledge, right? You're not talking to yourself. You're talking to other scholars, and you're building. All right. So it's 1:00 in the morning for Wrecker. So we probably shouldn't go too long, but Shirley, if you were to, so that's, I think, an important thing, that the theory distinction. Is there anything else that, especially for people trying to do, all of Germany where Wrecker is, there's a whole entire country of engineers that just want to publish their engineering, right?
They're not just engineers. What a dreadful word.
That's the Germans. It's a country of engineers, isn't it?
Well, if you listen to our podcast, Shirley, he keeps saying that, like every second episode, he just makes blatant generalizations about an entire population.
Well, this is awful, isn't it? And this is part of Europe where everyone, the engineers included, do philosophy in high school.
They do. We do. We do.
And then they forget it all by college.
No, actually, we had a workshop the other day where we talked about the importance of reading. And someone said, look, at some stage, you have to get into the deep philosophy. And I said, well, to be honest, I got most of these really hard stuff out of my ways in my 20s because I had to then. And I'm so thankful that I don't have to reread Gadamer and Vinograd and Flores and all these sorts of things now. Can I bring one other topic up?
Okay.
So what I get sometimes, people do put me in this design bucket. I don't even know why, but I've sort of over the years, I've come to accept it, that people associate me with this as well, even though I wouldn't call myself a design science researcher in any terms. Anyway, so that also means, for example, I get to handle some of these papers as well as an editor. I see a lot of papers where it's a little bit what Nick said. They build an artifact and it's a cool artifact and it even solves a problem and they just want to publish the artifact. And very often my response is, well, that should be published, but why does it have to be published in a paper? Can't you just put the thing out there? Like, why do you have to have an MISQ paper about the artifact? Why can't you just, put it on LinkedIn or something, make it available on GitHub, or, we have wonderful means. Why does So sometimes my view is that in an academic paper, especially on a particular level, I want to see a little bit more, because the artifact I can look up by if you give me the URL. Ideally I can download it onto my iPhone or whatever. Like there's many better ways of disseminating and publishing and distributing and popularizing and socializing an artifact than having it in the weird confines of the scripted articles that are in our journal. So I sometimes think like the journal it should be about something else. The artifact, just put it out there. Would you agree?
No, that's good. I think that's quite a reasonable point. So you have to have some abstraction away about exactly what we've been saying along. The abstractions have to be about what the person can take away, the principle, and then how does that add to the body of knowledge? Why is it different? So if my artifact's better than your artifact, how is it better? Have I proved it's better? But then why is it better?
Yeah.
Sometimes, that's going to be quite hard to show, isn't it? I mean, say someone produced it mightn't be why it's better. It might be that there was no other artifact at all before that worked under these conditions. And in that case, it's a contribution.
But, I don't even think you have to show it necessarily in the way of demonstrating, comparing it or whatever. I think you have to make the argument. You can make, I can say, here's my artifact. It's better in these performance dimension. I can probably get some data on that too. But the why is it better? That to me is a logical argument. This is an argument that I'm making, and I don't necessarily need data for that. I need to argue really well.
Yeah, and
I don't think you have a need for proof there as well. That would be, all these things then would blow up a lot.
Sometimes you don't have to say it's better either. I mean, it's just, or why it's better, because some things, like if it's the very first, say, just pick an engine, say the bubble sort. I mean, no one had thought of a bubble sort. And I could explain the principle of a bubble sort to you in about 2 minutes, but to actually think that up and make it work took some effort.
Yeah.
But then why is it? It's just better. It's better in certain circumstances when you've got a very limited array of working knowledge. So someone just cleverly thought that up. So that's a pure design.
Yeah, but that's solving a problem, right? How can I sort things? And there are a bunch of different sorting algorithms. And if you're writing a pure algorithm to solve a problem, that's not an information systems contribution, I would say. That's not a socio-technical, it's not organization, it's an algorithm. So you write that.
It's a software engineering thing, and there's journals for that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I was just thinking we might have something the same in our discipline, something that's really unusual,
So I would say some of the artifacts that we've designed, if you will, that are unique are, especially in the olden days, I don't think we're doing it much anymore, but the various software development traditions before Agile took over, right? Like ethics and the Scandinavian, they were designing these ways to design artifacts, right? And those software development processes were original, and they didn't have to show how one was better than the other. They would argue for it. Like they argued that participatory design included voices that weren't included otherwise, right? So, but here's the thing, they were doing it in the world, right? It was rare that people were proposing methods that they weren't using somewhere, right? So they could at least anecdotally point that out.
And there's a lot of these traditions, especially from Europe. I mean, I was just thinking of multi-view by David Avison. That's, that's a methodology for systems development, a very comprehensive and complex one and it comes out of industrial practice, I suppose, that he was doing, proposing, studying, using for 30 years. And that's sort of research as well, right? Or you would know this guy, there's some guys in Germany that have been doing this for 30, 40 years. Some of these enterprise architecture guys from Duisburg, like Ulrich Frank, they've been, they've come up with their own methodologies for doing something.
It's a shame. It's a shame that some of these things don't get remembered either, that sometimes in the quest for something new in journals, we invent new names, or because I've just had to do a small project myself of implementing a point of sale system in the local art gallery with a group of volunteers, all very mature people, very averse to technology. And look, I just went back to adoption 101. I was using I was using a theory of diffusion of innovations. It was the characteristics of innovation straight off. Absolutely textbook case.
Yeah.
You know, to get them to use it, I had to get another old person to come and demonstrate how they were using it in another place. They wouldn't have accepted if I'd got someone who was a tech person. They wouldn't have accepted them. But I had to get another person like them from another place who'd used the same system and come and talk to them. And it's working as of this month. So again, that's another thing we might learn from this. You know, don't throw out the
knowledge.
If I had to wrap this up, I still would go back to something I said at the very beginning, where I said, look, if someone asked me, how do I publish design science in the top journals? The answer is like anything else too. You know, do scholarly work, do it bloody well, write bloody well about it. Make sure, I'm sorry, but these journals make sure there are theoretical contributions, whatever that means. We talked a lot here about these abstractions and the extraction of knowledge, etc. Well, these principles are basically the rules of the game for any paper. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I don't think there's anything different or unique. I do think it's very hard to do. But then again, have you tried doing a survey these days? That's bloody hard as well. And you probably won't get that published at all, right? So I don't think there's nothing inherently different or more difficult. It's just bloody difficult, but it all is. And it's probably a good thing that it is, because, you know, that shows us that we're making some progress in a way.
No, that's right, Jan. That's right.
So Shirley, as we wrap up, what would you one of the things that you kind of you wanted to tell us was, hey, you're not the theory person. You have a very broad view of theory, kind of like you have this very broad view of design research, right? You include a lot.
That's right.
And I'm looking forward to reading your CAS paper on, the 4 quadrants there. So is there something before we kind of get going that you would want to leave maybe junior researchers that are interested in doing design research?
Well, I think the one thing is be tolerant. Be tolerant and be open in your own thinking, and be open when you're doing reviews of other people's. Be constructive if you're doing reviews of others, trying to get them towards something good instead of throwing something out because of some preconception you've got in your own mind. So be tolerant. And then again, I think too that the scholarly tradition, trying to build up the cumulative body of knowledge, that's what we're about. That's what we're here for. And we want it to make it accessible to others. So we want work that can go out eventually and be used in the world and stop people building things that are less than useful or actually harmful.
Yeah. And don't necessarily forget the old stuff, right? I like that.
Don't forget the old stuff, no.
Yeah.
But I think, just to reiterating this a little bit, is I've been a member of many different special interest groups, and I do think that some of them, including designs, and they're not helping each other enough. You know, if you want to grow a community, if you want to make things more legitimate, if you want to get more design science out, well, you gotta accept it, there's only so many, especially with small communities, there's only so many people that could possibly do the review. So we're all gonna review each other's works anyway. And I do think that some communities have been doing that much better in being more tolerant and more accepting to a variety of different ways of doing research in that tradition. So I'll give you one example outside of design science. The Green IS, this sustainability and technology community that we've had it for about 15 years or so, since Rick Watson and others have sort of initiated this. Well, it's still only 40 people, and they rarely ever publish anything because they're the hardest, harshest review, the harshest critics. Nothing is ever good enough. Yeah, they all want I save the planet every single time with every single paper. I swear to God, it's like this. And I always look at this and like, well, that way we're never going to get anywhere. Yeah. So in a little bit, as I said, I think this is a problem of the design science community as well. It's bloody hard. People have found it tough for themselves, so it's got to be tough for everybody else. It's like I've reached up the ladder and I'm pulling it up behind me.
So you should write a paper on how to do Green IS research. If you can't do it, you should write papers on how to do it.
No.
I think at the moment we're quite set with papers on how to do stuff. Maybe we just need to go out and do more stuff.
There you go.
All right, Shirley, it was wonderful having you.
Pleasure.
I haven't seen you in a long time, obviously because of the pandemic. But yeah, it's just great picking your brain.
I hope you can visit again, Jan. I hope you can come back. You know, it's a beautiful part of the world.
I know. I'm a very proud Australian, but it was a little easier being a German in Australia than it is being an Australian in Germany. I say that as much. But yeah, that's the plan for early next year. It is the plan. I just got to figure out how to bring my kids along. Yeah. And I have to tell my wife too. She doesn't know about this yet. All right.
Well, thank you for coming on, Shirley.
Thank you, Shirley, coming on. Good to see you, both of you.